Frank Gaffney's with me. He usually joins me at this time on Wednesdays, and we're always happy to talk to him. Vice Chair of the Committee on the Present Danger, Securing America with Frank Gaffney, securingamerica.tv for all things Gaffney. And Frank, let's talk about one of the biggest stories of the week, really of the weekend, but I want your take on it, which is China setting records and breaking their own record in terms of breaching Taiwanese airspace. Obviously an act of aggression, and I think they were taking the temperature of the United States. I know they follow our media closely. I know they follow our government closely, and we, of course, did nothing, and we do nothing, and that's what we do. Hopefully, behind the scenes, we're pushing back, but I am not holding my breath on that. What happened? What does it mean? And do you share my alarm about what could happen next?
I do, Alex. I think that what is happening is clearly a ratcheting up by the Chinese Communist Party of its rhetoric, yes, but also its actions, in the hopes, I think, of persuading the Taiwanese that their fate is sealed. The United States is no longer going to come to their defense any more than it did its Afghan allies, and that it's just a question of how ugly this gets. Are they going to have to use military force, or will the Taiwanese simply surrender to the growing threat of it, of course, but also other coercive pressures? Thus far, the Taiwanese have not indicated any interest in doing that. You have a good report from John Hayward in Breitbart at the moment about how the leader of Taiwan has essentially said, look, this isn't just about us. This is about the fate of democratic alliances and freedom more generally. And one might think that, well, that's a self-serving statement and should be discounted, but I actually think it's right. Because what clearly is the ambition of China under the leadership of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, as you know, Alex, is not just dominating what they call a rogue province, we call a sovereign nation, at least when we're being honest about it, and a freedom-loving people at that, whose functioning democracy is really one of the best in the world. But they seek global domination, the CCP, and they make no bones about it. And they know that ultimately we are the impediment to that. And that's what makes this such a fraught moment. I'm not sure that we've seen as dangerous a time on the geopolitical stage, Alex, in a generation. Because I think what the Chinese are doing is not only teeing up the possibility of a conflict, perhaps precipitated by accident. When you're flying 50-plus aircraft into the air defense identification zone of Taiwan, there's a distinct possibility that the Taiwanese, or the Chinese for that matter, may take an action that sets in motion a conflict. And that conflict could well not be confined to Taiwan. Because, again, the Chinese Communist Party's larger purpose is to take us down and thereby clear the way for the domination of the world, which they think is their due. So all of these things are operating. I think it is very dangerous, and we need to be deterring China credibly. Statements are fine, and there have been more of them out of this administration of late, but they have to be backed by action.
Well, I think that there's concern that they're seen as weak-kneed, and I think that is not good, because sometimes people who are insecure about their strength are some of the most reckless actors, and I think we saw that play out in Afghanistan, where we botched the withdrawal, so we decided we would drone some children to death. Like, that would be that was the way we dealt with that, which is still stunning, and there's still been zero accountability for it, and there won't be, because the media doesn't demand such things. But Frank, the problem that we have here is that Joe Biden does not see China as an adversary on the geopolitical stage, and he does not see threats to our allies like Taiwan as a problem. He probably does not even think of Taiwan as an ally the same way that you and I do. And this is where I'm concerned, because just because he's in denial of this reality, it doesn't make it not true.
Well, before we get to that point, I think we do have to at least take note of the fact that it's not clear what Joe Biden believes about anything at the moment, or even if he is compos mentis to the point where he can possibly serve as our commander-in-chief. And you have a good piece about John Kerry's statement that he was totally unaware, literally unaware of what has been reported to be one of the most important steps that we've taken to date to deal with the growing threat from China, namely this U.S.-British collaboration to get Australia nuclear-powered attack submarines. If he's not aware of that, I think the question is begged, Alex, how much of anything else is he aware of? And to your point, if he is aware, does he have the judgment? Does he have a policy direction that is commensurate with the kind of danger that we were just talking about? And I'm going to repeat what I've said to you before, because I think it becomes more and more urgent that we know the answer. What did he and Xi Jinping, the dictator of China, say to one another? Or more to the point, what did Xi say to Biden? Because he couldn't possibly have carried on a conversation for 2 hours at a pop in February and 90 minutes more recently. So what's the content of these conversations? We, I think, have increasing reason to believe it's Xi Jinping telling Joe Biden what he is going to have to do to accommodate Xi. And we're seeing a whole bunch of these concessions. It's very troubling, but the larger point is the one you've made. What do the Chinese take away from this? I think they probably perceive a window of opportunity to act with, probably violence, but certainly to act more and more aggressively against Taiwan and possibly us.
Yeah, exactly. Frank Gaffney again is my guest. So let me ask about this climate czar John Kerry saying that we're not aware that of China's belligerence here. What is he focused on if he's not aware of this? Isn't China the biggest polluter? Shouldn't he be on top of what's going on with China?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things going on here. Let me come to the climate business. I think what he was specifically talking about was the point I just made, which is that the president was literally not aware of this very momentous deal that his administration has been touting as evidence of their determination to confront the Chinese by working with the Australians and the Brits. But to the point about climate, what John Kerry is clearly doing, as he has done throughout his sordid career, is betraying our country. Yeah. And in this instance, he is trying to parlay his overarching authority to bend every American policy, every American interest to advancing a putative international collaboration, notably with the Chinese, to try to do something about global climate change, to essentially say, hey, even things like genocide that the Chinese are formally accused by the Biden administration itself of engaging in just isn't that important. Nothing must get in the way of whatever collaboration he's being promised by the Chinese, and so far it doesn't seem as though it's very much. But this John Kerry's judgment, John Kerry's capacities, John Kerry's loyalty to our country, I think, has long been a problem for our nation. And I think in this role in particular, it is exceedingly worrying because we can't afford to ignore what the Chinese are doing, whether it's to their own people or whether it's to others, because it is unquestionably the case that whatever they might be promising on the global front, the climate change front, that is, it generally doesn't amount to very much. Usually it's very advantageous to them, but it doesn't alter the reality that they are our mortal enemies. Not all of the Chinese people, but the Chinese Communist Party for sure, and that they must be dealt with as such, not as partners to whom we must really submit, which is the Kerry mode.
One thing that was interesting is that John Kerry was on French TV and saying that he did not know what had transpired with this submarine deal between the U.S. and Australia. I don't know what Kerry's role would have been in this. Frank, maybe maybe you should have had a big role in it. But we got a clip. Let's play this clip of 5A, Paul.
President Biden asked me about it, and I told him and expressed...
You told Joe Biden that it was not the right...
He asked me. He said, what's the situation? And I explained exactly. He had not been aware of that. He literally had not been aware of what had transpired. And I don't want to go into the details of it, but suffice it to say that the president, my president, is very committed to strengthening the relationship and making sure that this is a small event of the past and moving on to the much more important future.
I don't know. What does that mean? Is he just being a politician? I don't understand, Frank.
Well, again, I think he's saying that his president, as he puts it, was totally unaware that we had made this big deal with the Australians and the Brits, and more to the point, that it had caused a lot of trouble with our relationship with France. He was obviously speaking to French media and French audiences. So he was doing his diplomatic dance to make it sound as though this is a tiny blip in the radar and it's now in the past and we're going on to much bigger things of collaboration on climate change. But what he was saying, en passant, as they say in France, was the president didn't know what we were doing with respect to this big initiative. Literally unaware were his exact words. And I don't want to beat this to death except to say that I'm afraid, Alex, it is symptomatic of the condition of our president, and his infirmity is such as to make it exceedingly dangerous, because you cannot have a clueless commander-in-chief, especially in a strategic environment like this. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate this, but I think probably by accident, but possibly by design, we could find ourselves in a very, very violent conflict with China at any moment. And here's the thought. Even if it's not accidental, it may be that reports that we're getting of internal difficulties on the financial front, the economic front, the political front for Xi Jinping are such that, as has been the case in the past, this particular totalitarian is going to opt for what they call social engineering, manufacturing foreign crises or foreign threats to help justify internal repression and difficulties and sacrifice. And he certainly is teeing the Chinese people up for that. There's among other things been blackouts. You've been reporting on this in China. Some are saying that those are essentially trying to prepare the Chinese for the possibility that as a result of conflict, they may not have the supplies of coal that are needed to power a lot of their electric grid. So he is warning them repeatedly, you must prepare for war. Well, who's he talking about having war with? I think it probably is not just the Taiwanese, it may be us as well. So for all these reasons, we desperately need a commander-in-chief who is clued up, who is on the job, who has both the judgment as well as, the capacity to lead our country in these dangerous times. And I think what John Kerry probably inadvertently admitted to is this president is in none of those ways qualified at the moment.
Frank, a couple other ones I want to bring up to you today is the report that came out, we reported on it, Breitbart, published by an Australian cybersecurity firm, that China doubled spending on coronavirus testing long before warning the world about Wuhan. It just indicates that they knew stuff before the world knew about it, and they were prepared to start testing. And this is another thing with that is interesting, is that there's always a huge lag in information in the media that from what the government knows. And this is sometimes with good information, sometimes with bad information. And it's just important to remind ourselves of this, that when we're seeing reports start trickling out in early January 2020, it doesn't mean that the pandemic was 4 days old then. It could be months old, and it just no one found out about it yet.
Yeah, this is the problem that we've been wrestling with, for the better part of 2 years now, which is, what did the Chinese government know, and when did it know it? And there are those, and I am among them, who believe they knew all about this because they manufactured this disease as a bioweapon. I personally believe they released it as a bioweapon. And it may well be what this report suggests, though it can't be proven because the Chinese are not assisting in any way in actually getting to the bottom of what happened here, Alex. But as you know, there is reason to believe that the Chinese used military games that were held in Wuhan in October of 2019 as a super spreader event, deliberately, to infect military personnel from around the world and send this disease overseas. Now, they did have problems domestically, of course, a few months later. They went through this huge lockdown exercise, which became the standard by which everybody else was supposed to respond to this. We did, with devastating effect on our society as well as our economy, our people, our freedoms. But did the Chinese deliberately release this? It certainly stands to reason that if they were going to deliberately release it, they would take the sorts of steps that this report out of Australia indicates that they took, namely to buy up what they could in the way of testing equipment, PCR tests they're called, well in advance, making sure that they were able to diagnose the nature and extent of the disease that they were unleashing on the world.
I think that's frightening, but also interesting. The one thing that's interesting, domestic news, I don't know if you're up on this, Frank, but the man I refer to as the friendly fascist, Francis Collins from the NIH, is stepping down, and he's in the middle of a scandal because he is not only was he the guy who said you should wear a mask in your home with your own kids, but he was in total denial of America's funding of the Wuhan Virology Institute, and he basically got caught lying, or else being such an unbelievable ignoramus, he should get fired for that too. But he's resigning, he's stepping down. And he's been a guy who I think has protected China in all this, whether he did it out of that he just loves China or whether or not he's just a swamp creature and that's the culture in Washington. But I think it's a good thing that's happening. But it's interesting because on the way out the door, his last proclamation, hopefully his last proclamation, was that he's got no evidence at all to support the lab leak theory. Why do they keep pushing this on us, Frank? And I'm not in the camp that's 100%. We know for sure without a reasonable doubt that it's in the lab. It came from the lab, but all of the math suggests it would have come from the lab. I mean, of course, that's the most logical thing. And he's still, even though he's leaving, he's making this point to go out of his way to say, "Hey, it couldn't have been the lab." I guess I know the answer to this. It's because we funded the lab, and Fauci and Francis Collins are responsible. But is that really it? Is that why we can't be honest now that those guys made a big mistake?
I think this is classic example of butt covering, Alex, to be honest.
That's what it feels like.
You're right that they have been deeply implicated in bringing this disease to pass, teaching the Chinese biological warfare program how to so-called gain of function modify enhance and make vastly more dangerous garden variety diseases. They've spent millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer funds for this purpose. I believe that even worse, some of those funds are continuing to be paid to PLA, People's Liberation Army, medical personnel, researchers, scientists, what have you, in the United States as we speak. It's still going on. And I think that he and Tony Fauci have simply decided that they're going to double down on their denials, on their lies, and on their deceptions of the American people about what's gone on and their direct personal responsibility for it. The only question I have is, why on earth is Tony Fauci not resigning?
Yeah.
He should be under exactly the same cloud and should be given exactly the same exit ramp immediately, as far as I'm concerned. But Alex, I think this all just speaks to the larger problem that I know you guys are trying every day to unravel, which is, where does the truth lie? Where
Sure.
does the truth lie about what the Chinese did? They're in inflicting this on not just us but the world, to the cost of now 700,000 American lives and millions more elsewhere. What was the involvement of American government agencies and taxpayer funding? We have a right to know, just as we have a right to know about the truth about vaccines and the dangers associated with them. I don't think we've had clarity coming forward from the same sources about all that either. So sadly, losses of life have been huge and are likely to continue to grow, and probably a fair amount of it unnecessarily, because we're not getting the truth on these many points.
Frank Gaffney, you can go to securingamerica.tv. You can follow him on Twitter at Frank Gaffney. Thanks, Frank. We'll really appreciate it.
My pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
I'll take a break. We'll come back, take some of your calls. Take some of your calls.